Corrine, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the February 5th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. As always, thank you for joining us today. The highlights under business and finance are: artificial intelligence is supercharging Google's advertising and cloud computing businesses, and the company is stepping up spending to unheard of levels in its quest to win the AI race. The S&P 500 and NASDAQ fell by 0.5% and 1.5% respectively, as a slide in tech stocks spread from software into semiconductor shares and other companies linked to the infrastructure build-out for AI. The Dow rose 0.5%. Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina said he doesn't believe Fed Chair Jerome Powell committed a crime in testimony that has become central to an explosive Justice Department investigation. Advisors for SpaceX, which recently merged with xAI, reached out to index providers to discuss how the company might join key indexes sooner than normal. The private sector added 22,000 jobs in January, human resources firm ADP estimated, less than half the tally expected by analysts surveyed by the Wall Street Journal. Uber continued to gain customers at a fast clip thanks to geographic and product expansions, which executives said will fuel growth for years to come. The Washington Post is cutting 1/3 of its staff, representing hundreds of jobs, in an effort to trim costs and reshape coverage. Hedge fund D.E. Shaw is pushing for a board shakeup and other changes at CoStar, a real estate information provider that is already facing pressure from Third Point. Now for the key articles under the Worldwide section. The Supreme Court allowed California to use a new congressional map that is projected to add 5 Democratic-leaning House seats in the 2026 midterm elections. Top Senate negotiators said an effort to renew expired health care subsidies had effectively collapsed, likely ending the hopes of 20 million Americans for lower monthly insurance premiums. Congress received a redacted version of a classified government whistleblower complaint against spy chief Tulsi Gabbard. The administration is pulling 700 of the approximately 3,000 federal officers and agents out of Minnesota, Border Czar Tom Homan said. The man who was convicted of attempting to assassinate Trump in Florida in 2024 was sentenced to life in prison. Trump said he spoke with Xi about the situation in Iran, hours after the Chinese leader held a call with Moscow on the matter. The top Democrat on a House committee launched an investigation into a $500 million investment by an Abu Dhabi royal in a Trump family cryptocurrency company. The leader of law firm Paul Weiss resigned as chair in the wake of revelations about his associations with Jeffrey Epstein. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor was ejected from the house he had been occupying after Epstein disclosures. Died Lee Hamilton, 94, former congressman. The picture on today's front page shows someone with white gloved hands holding a framed picture of a reclining lion. And that caption reads, "A tiny Rembrandt draws a roaring $17.9 million." The caption, "Cat Eyes." A chalk drawing of a recumbent lion by Rembrandt sold for $17.9 million at a Sotheby's auction on Wednesday, smashing the Dutch master's $3.7 million record for a work on paper reflecting the strength of the art market's recovery. Articles from the front page follow. Tech sell-off propels NASDAQ to its worst 2 days in months. Wall Street rotates out of AI leaders into real economy company stocks. By Hannah Aaron Lang, Xavier Martinez, and David Uberti. Wall Street software jitters are turning into an AI slump. Declines in tech stocks intensified Wednesday, spreading from software to semiconductor shares and other companies linked to the infrastructure build-out for artificial intelligence. The NASDAQ Composite posted consecutive 1% declines for the first time since April's tariff chaos. The moves rattled investors already unnerved by the recent pullback in software stocks that accelerated after the startup Anthropic unveiled a suite of new tools which can perform industry-specific functions like reviewing legal contracts. Traders are worried that the impact of AI could be more widespread than initially thought, and at the same time that the companies in the technological arms race might fall short of delivering the sky-high profits many are hoping for. Investors continued a weeks-long trend of rotating dollars out of longtime stock market superstars such as chip stocks and the big tech giants, while funneling funds into more traditionally unloved corners of the market. On Wednesday, they plugged money into companies more directly linked to an economy that is showing signs of accelerating growth, pushing up shares of firms ranging from Eli Lilly to Old Dominion Freight Line and MGM Resorts International. 7 of 11 S&P 500 sectors ended Wednesday in the green. The energy, materials, and consumer staples sectors are all up by at least 12% this year. The Dow Jones Industrial Average on Wednesday gained 0.5% or 260 points. The S&P 500 finished down 0.5%, with 92 stocks setting new 52-week intraday highs, the highest volume of such milestones in a single session since November 2024. Wednesday's NASDAQ slide was broader than the software-specific rout that rattled markets Tuesday. Chip maker Advanced Micro Devices skidded 17% after a disappointing earnings report to notch its worst day since 2017. Palantir shares dropped 12%. Data storage company SanDisk lost 16%. Traders said Wednesday's selling was orderly and showed few signs of panic. But some investors said the rally that pushed major indexes to repeated records in recent months has carried prices of some stocks to eye-watering levels, leaving them vulnerable to outsized swings. Alphabet sales hit record, spending to double. Google's parent's annual revenue tops $400 billion for the first time. By Catherine Blunt. Artificial intelligence is supercharging Google's advertising and cloud computing businesses, and the company is stepping up spending to unheard of levels in its quest to win the AI race. Google parent Alphabet reported an 18% jump in fourth quarter revenue and revealed plans to roughly double its spending on data centers and other capital projects. Sales exceeded analyst expectations at nearly $114 billion, driven by growth in the technology company's digital advertising and cloud computing units. Net income was $34.5 billion, a 30% increase compared with the same period a year earlier. Earnings per share increased 31% to $2.82, ahead of expectations. The company reported a record $403 billion in sales in 2025, the first time annual revenues surpassed $400 billion. Profit reached about $132 billion last year. Google, like other tech companies, is spending tens of billions of dollars to develop AI models and build the data centers needed to train and run them. Democrats push to curb ICE hits GOP resistance. By Lindsay Wise, Siobhan Hughes, and Michelle Hackman. Washington. Democrats' drive to reach a deal to put new restrictions on immigration enforcement agents is running into a Republican brick wall, with lawmakers in both parties saying an agreement looks increasingly unlikely by a February 13th deadline. Congress has just more than a week to reach a deal, or funding will lapse for the Department of Homeland Security, which oversees immigration and customs enforcement, as well as agencies including the Transportation Security Administration and Federal Emergency Management Agency. Among Democrats' demands are an end to roving street patrols by federal immigration agents, tighter rules governing warrants and use of force, independent investigations for officer misconduct, and a prohibition on agents wearing masks. They also want to require agents to use body cameras and carry identification. Republicans are open to some of these ideas, but have rejected others, while also introducing their own demands, like an end to so-called sanctuary cities. The bottom line is, we're ready to sit down and negotiate, but it's got to be strong, it's got to be tough, it's got to rein in ICE in very serious ways and end the violence. And we hope our Republican colleagues will meet us on that, Senator Chuck Schumer of New York, the Democratic leader, said Wednesday. And if they're not serious and they don't put in real reform, they shouldn't expect our votes. Plain and simple. Senate Majority Leader John Thune Republican from South Dakota, said Wednesday that he is already thinking about proposing another stopgap funding bill for DHS, possibly for the rest of this fiscal year, assuming that talks fail. But Democrats said they are unlikely to provide the votes for any extension unless negotiations have made real progress. And Thune said their rhetoric suggested they weren't serious about reaching a deal. Hopefully, cooler heads will prevail, he said. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Flirty emails, chummy pics show Epstein's vast reach, by Khadija Safdar and Neil Mehta. Casey Wasserman was in Italy for the Winter Olympic Games, scheduled to make a presentation to the International Olympic Committee on the progress of the 2028 Los Angeles Games, for which he has led the planning. Peter Attia, a longevity doctor with cult followers and a best-selling book, was days into a new role as a CBS News contributor. And Brett Ratner was promoting Melania, his documentary about the First Lady, his first film since 2017, when 6 women accused him of sexual misconduct. All 3 men had reached or returned to the pinnacle of their industries in February 2026, and all 3, it turned out, had secrets in the Epstein files. Flirtatious email exchanges between Wasserman and Ghislaine Maxwell from 2003 were among the files released by the Justice Department on Friday. Attia's name appeared more than 1,700 times in the documents, with correspondence showing he maintained a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein through 2019. 20 undated photos showed Ratner hanging around with Epstein at his Manhattan townhouse, the 2 men with their arms wrapped around women whose identities are redacted. These interactions have largely escaped scrutiny. The Epstein saga has generated headlines about people such as former President Bill Clinton and the former Prince Andrew, whose fame has ensured maximum attention. Clinton, who has been called to testify before Congress, has said he had no knowledge of Epstein's criminal activity. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, who has been stripped of his royal title, has denied that he participated in sexual abuse. But the files contain millions of pages, and many of the people in them are former royals or former presidents. They are executives, doctors, lawyers, and deal makers at the tops of their field. Their now public messages and photographs reveal just how intricately Epstein spun his web of influence and how he traded on his connections to amass wealth and powerful friends. The files also show that some people sought the counsel and companionship of Epstein, sometimes even after he pleaded guilty to soliciting a minor for prostitution in 2008. Associations that some had previously denied and were, until now, largely hidden. This week, they have had to discuss their secrets. Wasserman and Attia said they regretted their email exchanges and didn't know about Epstein's crimes. Ratner said the photos were from 20 years ago. The woman in the photos was his then fiancée, and he didn't really know Epstein. Cemetery offers to turn loved ones into gardening soil. Brooklyn's Greenwood Cemetery embarks on eco-friendly alternative by Tom Fearless. There is a looming crisis in America's death industry. Greenwood Cemetery might have found a lifeline. The storied 478-acre Brooklyn burial ground, like many across the U.S., is running out of room for new occupants. With the help of a German entrepreneur, cemetery officials believe they can profitably augment the property by turning loved ones into gardening soil. The process, called natural organic reduction, uses the body's own bacteria to transform human tissue. The dead are placed in a sealed vessel bedded with clover, hay, and straw, and equipped to regulate airflow, temperature, and moisture. Then nature takes its course. Microbes break down everything but bones, which are ground into the final compost mix. Greenwood's plan is to use the nutrient-rich material to nurture trees, meadows, and the bottom line. It's a way to integrate revenue generation with ecological regeneration, said Joseph Charup, Vice President of Horticulture at Greenwood. Around 3 million Americans die each year, a number expected to approach 4 million annually over the next 2 decades, according to the National Funeral Directors Association, an industry lobbying group. Cremation, which eliminates the cost of embalming and coffins, is used for more than 60% of deaths in the U.S., a share likely to rise to 82% by 2045, according to a survey published in September by the association. Vaughn has a torn ACL. She's still going for gold, by Rachel Bachman. When skier Lindsey Vonn announced on Tuesday she was going to try to race in the Olympics with a completely torn knee ligament, it sounded as though she'd left her good sense somewhere up a mountain. The American star was already 41 years old and racing on a knee partially rebuilt with a titanium hardware. Now she was saying that after tearing the ACL in her other knee just 9 days before the downhill race at the Milan Cortina Olympics downhill, she still planned to compete. I think this would be the best comeback I've done so far, Vonn said. Definitely the most dramatic. That's for sure. What is much less clear is how such a comeback is even possible. Countless people who have torn their ACLs and then spent a year rehabilitating were baffled by Vonn's confidence. When athletes tear ACLs in other sports, crowds are used to watching them writhe on the ground in agony. On Sunday, they might watch Vonn hurtle down an icy hill at 80 miles an hour. Medical experts, however, say what she's doing isn't outlandish if her knee remains stable. There are precedents for skiing with a torn-up knee, including in Vonn's own history. The crash rate for alpine racing is so high that skiers, unlike basketball or soccer players, become accustomed to competing with injuries, said Kevin Stone, an orthopedic surgeon in San Francisco and a former U.S. ski team physician. The key factor with Vonn, he said, is how much of her injury is old versus new. Her long list of injuries doesn't include a torn left ACL, but she has suffered other injuries to the knee. On Tuesday, Vaughn said her knee wasn't swollen and that she had no pain. She planned to ski with a brace to stabilize her knee and take part in a mandatory training run on the Cortina course in order to compete. After Thursday's first training run was canceled due to poor weather, only the Friday and Saturday sessions remain. Before her crash, Vaughn was leading the World Cup season standings in the downhill. She was an Olympic gold medal favorite. The injury has reduced her to a long shot. But if Vaughn can complete a training run, she probably will be able to race, Stone said. The Pats' offensive mastermind, New England's Josh McDaniels, has turned Drake May into one of the NFL's best quarterbacks. By Andrew Beaton, San Jose, California. When the New England Patriots signed Mike Vrabel as a young linebacker in 2001, they sent a gopher from the team's personnel department to scoop him up at the airport. The temporary chauffeur, freshly hired by New England, was named Josh McDaniels. Together they went on to win several Super Bowls as McDaniels worked his way up to become the voice in Tom Brady's ear, also known as Bill Belichick's offensive coordinator. And then Vrabel returned to England as head coach last season. He knew exactly who to pull off the couch. It was time for McDaniels to return to the Patriots again. This marks McDaniels' third different stint as New England's offensive coordinator, and it's his most impressive work to date. With Brady long gone, he has transformed the Patriots' offense into one of the NFL's best, while developing Drake May into an elite passer ahead of Sunday's Super Bowl showdown with the Seattle Seahawks. Josh is the best that I've been around, said Doug Maroney, the Patriots' offensive line coach and a former head coach with the Bills and Jaguars. When situations come up and problems come up, you have to know how to solve that. And Josh knows exactly what we have to do. New England's rapid offensive improvement this year is a reminder that there are few geniuses in the sport on the level of the 49-year-old McDaniels. Over his career, he's won 6 Super Bowls, 3 of them as a play caller, which makes him one of the most accomplished offensive assistants in football history. Normally, that type of resume would earn him his pick of head coaching roles. The problem is how badly McDaniels has flopped when he has actually held the top job. The 2 times he left the Patriots were for head coaching gigs, and they went so disastrously that he was fired midway through his second season, both occasions. One reason is that his coaching style isn't for everyone. McDaniels is hard on his players and runs a notoriously complicated offense. Not all quarterbacks are capable of navigating the set of complex decisions he puts in front of them. But May has proven up to the task. It takes a special player to play for Josh, said former Patriots backup quarterback Brian Hoyer. He's very demanding. Although Vrabel won 3 titles as a player in New England, this is his first Super Bowl as a coach. So he's leaning on McDaniels, who has been to 9, for advice on how to handle the biggest game of the season. Todd Downing, the wide receivers coach, said that the experience is obvious in McDaniels' unshakable calm. What amazes Downing more, however, is his offensive acumen. Even though McDaniels is still in his 40s, he has been working in the same system long enough that he seems to know instantly how to address any situation. He's experienced so much as a play caller, Downing said. It's really cool to watch him be this computer of knowledge. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the editorial page, Netflix gets a beltway beating. Politicians in both parties want to use antitrust policy as a political weapon. Once upon a time, in a saner Washington, there was bipartisan agreement that antitrust law should focus on consumer welfare. These days, antitrust has devolved into a form of political lawfare, as members of both parties showed in a Senate hearing Tuesday with Netflix CEO Ted Sarandos. Netflix has, for now, aced out Paramount's Skydance in a bidding war for Warner Brothers Discovery, though Paramount has made an alternative tender offer to Warner shareholders. Meantime, cue the protests from Hollywood unions and the cultural right, which have become bizarre bedfellows in opposing the Netflix acquisition. Senators on the Judiciary Committee took turns on Tuesday acting as antitrust lawyers for their respective political audiences. The overwhelming majority of your stuff is overwhelmingly woke, and it's not reflective of what American people want to see, Missouri Senator Eric Schmidt told the Netflix CEO. Why in the world would we give a seal of approval or a thumbs up to make you the largest behemoth on the planet related to content? Maybe because shareholders should decide, not politicians? His fellow Missourian Josh Hawley, a political thespian of the first rank, accused Netflix of promoting a transgender ideology. Even Texas's Ted Cruz, who is usually a GOP free market champion, riffed that the merger could create a propaganda outlet pushing one particular political view with much greater market power. It's true that the merger would combine two dominant streaming platforms. Netflix boasts about 325 million subscribers worldwide, and Warner Brothers' HBO Max and Discovery service has 128 million. But about 94% of HBO Max subscribers also subscribe to Netflix. The merger wouldn't substantially augment Netflix's audience. These pages have highlighted some of the bias in Netflix programming choices. This reflects progressive dominance in Hollywood. But people who don't like Netflix's programming have plenty of streaming alternatives, including Disney Plus, Hulu, YouTube, Amazon Prime, NBC Universal's Peacock, and Paramount Plus. Senators tried to analogize Netflix's clout to that of big tech. But there's much more choice and competition in streaming than in social media. Senators also claimed the merger would harm competition for workers, parroting a line from Hollywood unions that fret that it could reduce their bargaining leverage. But antitrust reviews are supposed to focus on whether a merger is good for consumers, not the Screen Actors Guild. New Jersey Senator Cory Booker could have won an Oscar for moral posturing. With a merger like this, I have real concerns about art, about culture, about the voices of Americans, about the moral imagination of a nation, he said. That's a script for politicizing antitrust reviews. Americans, even politicians, will rue the day when antitrust cops seek to regulate culture and moral imagination. From the opinion pages, Republicans Have an Economy Problem by Karl Rove. It's bad news for Republicans that recent coverage of President Trump has been dominated by topics ranging from invading Greenland and immigration and customs enforcement killings in Minneapolis to trashing the Grammys and ordering a giant Jeffrey Epstein document dump. These aren't as important to Americans as the economy. To correct this problem, the president came to Iowa last month for an economic speech. His team hoped his appearance in a Des Moines suburb would recenter the discussion. It didn't. Mr. Trump made two mistakes. The first was straying from the subject for almost half his speech: victories and stolen elections, immigration, introducing politicians on the stage, attacking his predecessor for multiple sins, lots of different foreign issues. He went everywhere, and therefore nowhere. The second problem was Mr. Trump's triumphal tone. He congratulated himself on the greatest first year of any administration in American history. The economy is booming, he said. It's been the best first year of any president ever, maybe. All this left the impression that the nation's economic challenges are solved. He made the same mistake President Biden did with the constant refrain that Bidenomics is working. Mr. Trump's declaring that, under my leadership, economic growth is exploding to numbers unheard of, isn't just exaggerated. It makes people who are suffering feel unseen and abandoned. Washington consultant Bruce Mehlman described Mr. Trump's challenge with charts sent to his clients on Sunday. He noted that the University of Michigan's Index of Consumer Sentiment shows the confidence of Americans without a college degree is the lowest since the question was first asked in 1976. Blue-collar jobs declined by more than 145,000 last year. Low-income households are hit harder by inflation because prices for necessities have grown rapidly. A Fox poll shows Republicans leading among white voters without a college degree by only 10 points. Add to Mr. Mehlman's observations that 58% in a new CNN poll say the president's year was a failure, while only 33% believe Mr. Trump cares about people like them. Approval in the Real Clear Politics average of Mr. Trump's handling of the economy is 41% and inflation 37%. The president should stop bragging. Many Americans, especially swing voters, feel things aren't good. A reliable Politics 101 strategy is to explain, emphasize, underpromise, and overdeliver. For Republicans, this involves three messaging steps. First, make clear that the Democrats and Mr. Biden were responsible for the inflation, wild spending, and record growth of red tape and regulation. They put America in the ditch. Second, describe how Mr. Trump and the GOP are strengthening the economy. They kept Democrats from imposing history's largest tax increase, by renewing Mr. Trump's 2017 tax cuts, then added new cuts, exclusions on tips, overtime, and Social Security. Republicans are controlling spending, reducing the deficit, and cooling inflation. Democrats shouldn't be given the power to reverse them. Third, stress there's more to be done. Mr. Trump and Republicans will repeal the Biden regulations that dumped $1.8 trillion in new cost on the economy. That will free up money for companies to put into bigger paychecks and better equipment. More trade deals will open markets for American goods and services. Giving patients a fixed sum and letting them shop for insurance that's best for them will help rein in healthcare costs. Continuing to reduce the deficit and make government leaner will strengthen the economy. None of this will happen if Democrats flip Congress. House and Senate Republicans shouldn't wait for Mr. Trump's messaging to become focused, nor should they depend on the economy getting better, even if it will. The president's voice can be powerful. More potent would be hundreds of candidates selling a conservative reform agenda like the one the House Republican Study Committee developed. For GOP success this fall, Republicans need a better economic message than what Americans heard from the president in Iowa. Mr. Rove was senior advisor and deputy chief of staff for President George W. Bush and is author of The Triumph of William McKinley. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Is AI the next climate change? Disaster looms, they tell us. Empower experts, raise taxes. Here we go again. By Barton Swaim. People should stop training radiologists now. It's just completely obvious that within 5 years, deep learning is going to do better than radiologists. So pronounced the cognitive scientist Geoffrey Hinton, colloquially known as the godfather of AI, a decade ago. He was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2024 for his work in artificial intelligence. Mr. Hinton thought AI would make radiologists useless. They have since grown in number, demand, and income. Mr. Hinton's claim was among the earliest that AI would make a whole class of human practitioners redundant. Others have come at regular intervals since. In 2023, a Goldman Sachs study concluded that roughly 2/3 of U.S. jobs are exposed to some degree of automation by AI, and that most of those have a significant but partial share of their workload, 25% to 50%, that can be replaced. Hedged language aside, that sounds like a lot of people on the unemployment rolls. Studies like Goldman's have generally shown more nuance than media reports and political pronouncements on supposed AI job loss. Amazon axes 16,000 jobs as it pushes AI and efficiency, Reuters announced last week. Politicians of a progressive bent do their best to dramatize the threat. AI and automation could replace nearly 100 million jobs over the next 10 years, including 89% of fast food and counter workers, 64% of accountants, and 47% of truck drivers, says a report by Democratic members of the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. Last year, Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei predicted that AI could displace about half of all entry-level white-collar jobs over the next 5 years, even as it drives productivity and growth to new heights. He reiterated that prognosis last week in a 20,000-word essay. Much of what he writes in this piece on the dangers of crazy people and rogue regimes accessing powerful AI tools, and on the ill-advisability of selling semiconductors to China, is perceptive and interesting. His predictions about AI and the labor market, less so. On the subject of AI replacing heretofore normal human activities, Mr. Amodei, born in 1983, writes with the wide-eyed wonder of a high school-age techno-utopian. I'm sure there are some tasks for which a human touch really is important, he reflects, but I'm not sure how many. When he states that, in the end, AI will be able to do everything, he means it literally. Mr. Amodei seems to base his prediction of massive and imminent job loss on his technological expertise, which is vast, rather than on his understanding of economics, which isn't. Nobody knows what AI's got in store for the economy, but less histrionic forecasts recommend themselves. Stephen LeWarn argued last week in these pages, cogently, in my opinion, that new AI tools won't replace workers, but allow them to perform higher value tasks. Anyway, if the threat to labor markets were as dire as Mr. Amodei supposes, job losses would be happening already. He acknowledges, in a parenthetical aside, that they likely aren't. A generous donor to Democratic candidates, Mr. Amodei speaks vaguely of the need for progressive taxation as a natural policy response to the dire outcome he foresees, and of drastic macroeconomic interventions. I think the extreme levels of inequality predicted in this essay justify a more robust tax policy on basic moral grounds. America's political class will happily supply the interventions, he suggests. Senators Josh Hawley, Republican from Missouri, and Mark Warner, Democrat from Virginia, want to require companies to report all AI-related layoffs, presumably with the aim of punitive taxation. Senator Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, favors a robot tax on companies that replace workers with AI, an idea supported by Bill Gates, among other politically engaged billionaires. Proposals abound to boost funding for job retraining programs, their dismal record of failure notwithstanding. Expect more interventions as predictions grow more dire. The world-weary consumer of news might reasonably wonder if we're headed into another version of climate alarmism. Consider a confederation of specialist climate scientists in one version, Silicon Valley geniuses in another, joins with liberal politicians and nonprofit heads to warn of an impending catastrophe. The only moral response to this new situation, these Olympians tell us, is to transfer authority over large parts of the economy to people like themselves. that they would favor such a transfer under any circumstances, with or without a coming disaster, doesn't bother the mainstream press, which reports their predictions with credulity and fervor. Meanwhile, ordinary people, lacking the specialized knowledge to draw their own conclusions, feel cowed into going along with it all. The economic cataclysm caused by artificial intelligence may never come, but like Godot, its arrival will remain always imminent, never actual. Politicians, celebrities, journalists, and scientists who have long predicted impending climate catastrophe have paid no price for their words, nor will Mr. Amadei in the event that his prophecies come to nothing. Only the macroeconomic interventions his words inspire will survive. As for Geoffrey Hinton, he barely admits he was wrong about radiologists. In retrospect, says a 2025 New York Times report, he believes he spoke too broadly in 2016. He didn't make clear that he was speaking purely about image analysis and was wrong on timing, but not the direction. A taxpayer revolt could shake up Oregon politics. Nearly 200,000 Oregonians signed a petition to put a tax repeal proposal on the ballot. In a horse-drawn carriage bearing a man dressed as Santa Claus, organizers of a campaign to overturn Oregon's new transportation taxes delivered some 193,000 signatures wrapped as Christmas presents to the Secretary of State's office in Salem last month. It was a lump of coal in progressive stockings. The organizers of the repeal effort, weary of being taxed at some of the highest rates in the nation, gathered the signatures in about a month to give voters the chance to rescind a $4.3 billion tax hike that Governor Tina Kotek and her allies shoved through the legislature along party lines. For decades a progressive paradise, Oregon finds itself on the cusp of a taxpayer revolt, reminiscent of California's Proposition 13. No Tax Oregon, the group that collected the signatures, is a grassroots movement led by taxpayers fed up with the Beaver State's progressive monopoly. In a matter of weeks, what began as a cynical exercise of political muscle in Salem turned into a referendum on the state's governing class. The effort was operated without paid professional signature gatherers. Instead, volunteers fanned out across the state, stood outside shopping malls and grocery stores, mingled with football fans at tailgate parties, and even collected signatures under awnings in the rain. Ms. Kotek, with the backing of the Service Employees International Union, called a special session last summer to pass a payroll and gasoline tax increase along with higher vehicle registration fees. The package, projected to raise about $4.3 billion over 10 years, was intended to address a state transportation department budget shortfall. Democrats billed it as essential to preventing layoffs, filling potholes, and keeping snow plows running. They presented a false dichotomy when they argued that the new taxes and fees were necessary to fund road maintenance. In reality, what's needed is better management of the department's budget. The Transportation Department has misplaced priorities thanks to the legislature's agenda, which often gives priority to costly, sometimes unnecessary infrastructure projects over basic road maintenance. As expected, the left used everything in its arsenal to thwart opposition. Their heavy-handed tactics backfired. In 10 days, volunteers collected 100,000 signatures, well over the number needed to qualify. Ultimately, they submitted nearly 200,000 signatures, putting the question on this November's ballot. Democrats haven't learned their lesson. After declaring they'd repeal the tax to shield it from a public vote, legislative attorneys told them doing so would be unconstitutional. Now Democrats want to move the vote from November to May, hoping to protect themselves from appearing on the same ballot as their unpopular tax hike. Doing so wouldn't be fair to voters, as turnout is higher for general elections. Some 2.3 million turned out in 2024 versus 1.1 million in that year's primary. Repeal of the tax hike in the referendum seems overwhelmingly likely. What remains uncertain is how the revolt will reshape Oregon's political landscape. A successful repeal could fracture the progressive coalition that has dominated for decades and affect midterm election outcomes. The horse-drawn delivery of petitions to Salem was more than a quaint photo op. It symbolized a return to the days when citizens spoke up and held accountable a government too comfortable in its power. Oregon's tax revolt isn't only about dollars and cents. It's about reclaiming the state's political soul from a ruling class that has forgotten who it serves. Mr. Eager is an attorney, former mayor of Bend, Oregon, and author of the Oregon Roundup on Substack. The Pepper and Salt cartoon today takes place inside a restaurant where a man is seated at a single table looking at a menu. And a cow comes over with a notepad in his hand and says, "Can I start you off with some milk?" You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the February 5th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal. We read from the Wall Street Journal every Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. Your reader has been Corrine. Thank you for listening and have a wonderful weekend.